again. Live chat will appear here. We are live. Part 2, test 2. Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Etienne and delighted to join you in a second attempt at our live stream today. Welcome, everyone. I see so many familiar names who were just here 5 minutes ago as we did our first preview. Apologies for all of that. Sometimes, well, there are technical changes. We can put that politely. But in my defense, I really even lost my internet for a minute there. So, hey, I'm delighted to welcome back our very own Emma Cox, who is returning after a brief hiatus of much needed time with family. And we are back to talk about influential women in Emma's family tree. And today, this is a little preview of where we're going next week. Welcome, Emma. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, Barbara.
Ooh. Tell us a little bit about what brought this idea up for the women in your family, and because I want to make sure to get this link out that everybody can see it. We already have many of you who were on our first attempt already joining, so it's apparently working to some extent, and we are. Well, obviously we are live. So tell us a little bit about what led to the whole idea for focusing on the women in your family story.
Well, it started because it was the second anniversary back in May, and I chose my second cousins, and somebody pointed out that there were no women there. And I just thought, okay, I'll have a look and just see what I can discover. And I've managed to pick out a couple of people who I think are pretty unique and quite well known, actually, in some circles. So I've chosen a lady called Freya Stark, who is an explorer. And she was quite famous in the 20th century. And she went to a lot of places that you probably wouldn't actually get to nowadays. And also, as a woman, was very unusual for her to go travelling into the Middle East and different places like that. And so it's a bit more about her story and the places she went to. And she wrote several books afterwards, which are still in print. So if anybody wants to actually go and get those. So there's Freya's story. We're going to be going into that one. And then there's a lady who was actually English-American. Her name was Nora Stanton Blatch. So she was basically a pioneer, and she is very, very significant in engineering. And she was basically one of the first people. She was actually the first woman civil engineer in America. Yeah. And she had quite a difficult time, and people wouldn't accept her. And so I was going to go into her story and tell a little bit more about what she actually did. And she got involved in tunnels, amongst other things, and building houses and all sorts of things. She was an architect. So she was a really interesting person. She was also interested in civil rights, women's rights. So she came from quite a strong family. Her mother and her grandmother were both heavily into that. So I was going to share a little bit more about their story as well as her story.
There you go. You know, it's amazing that for each of these topics that we start talking about, we dig into Emma's family tree and we find them. Mm-hmm. And, I think there's two factors to that. After all these years of knowing you now, I think there's two important factors to it. One is you're you with your incredible family, but also you're a remarkable researcher to be able to find these things and see where those patterns are. Because it's like saying, hey, who had relatives here 250 years ago? Everybody did.
With my tree, I was having a chat with somebody who I interviewed a while ago, and she was saying she likes to keep her tree quite small and quite close. She's a professional researcher, a genealogist. I see. And she knows all the people in her tree pretty well, and she's very confident about it and everything. Whereas I've taken the view of I've got more people on my tree, and around the edges of my tree, I don't know these people, and some are relatives of relatives and all sorts of things like that. But I think it's interesting to actually start to see the connections, because I find an awful lot of times there are intermarriages between different lines, and I think I've seen that line before, and I'll find it on a completely different line where someone's married someone of that surname. And so I think there are a lot more connections that appear. And so you can maybe go back several generations in your tree and you find two families that aren't related, and then lower down the line, okay, they come together, and that might happen more than once, and it might be different lines overlapping and things like that. And that's why I think it's interesting to be able to sort of pick people out.
Yeah, it's kind of a true, especially in small areas where they're looking at my family in Switzerland for generations and generations in a little tiny valley up in the Alps. Yeah, they diverge, they come back, they diverge, they come back. And, you find those kinds of connections you might not have expected to see. And yet there you were there your family line is in these amazing periods of history that affected all of us. Certainly as English speakers today, we have, even if it was only just the last generation, we have people who very often were related to others who came from some of the same sources, or the Industrial Revolution, affecting us in all parts of the world. Not to mention, imperial extensions ensure that the impacts were felt everywhere. So as you talk about things like patents and inventions and pieces like that, it's always a delight to see you. And, I want to take a moment here to thank everyone who's joining today. I recognize so many familiar faces. I was scrambling for a moment there, if you'll pardon my diversion, to figure out how the Substack live stream links work. There's a little 6-digit code at the end of that URL. That's the magic. So I popped that in there to share the this new link. And apologies again to anybody who joined us that first time and is still struggling to find us back again. And welcome. So good to see you joining us today.
So can I just make another point on that as well? A lot of people think that their family history is sort of infinite and it goes back and it's ever expanding, and you've got sort of 8 great-grandparents and 16, 32, 64, 128, and so it goes on. But if you go back a few generations, you actually would end up with a greater number than the population. So there are going to be people marrying each other. The reasons you said for the fact that people didn't travel so much, they actually stayed in the local community. They couldn't get that far. And so they actually married. So you have fewer great grandparents than you may think if you go back far enough. So in my tree, I've actually got the same great-grandparents on my 3 times great-grandparents and my 4 times great-grandparents, because I descend from 2 of their children, and one had children at roughly 25-year intervals, which came down to my grandfather. The other one had a child, the son had a child in his 40s, his wife died, had another child in his 60s, and that was my great-grandfather. So there's a lost generation in the middle there, but it leads back to the same generation. And they call that pedigree collapse, when people appear in your tree more than once. And I imagine that a lot of us will have that if you go far back enough in your tree, far enough back.
Absolutely. And that's what I was referring to in this relatively small canton in Switzerland, where because of the documentation that had been done, the pedigree collapse has already been defined, at least for one whole set relative to parish records. And you have illness, you have plagues, you have other kinds of things that wipe out generations. And then you have the remarriages that are healing things. So it's not as if everybody's simply intermarrying. It's, it's a complexity led by a desire for people to survive.
You know, and alongside that, you have the health issues whereby people died young, women died in childbirth, people wanted to ensure their children were looked after, so they looked for another wife to do that. That could have been a sister or something like that when it was allowed. Then it wasn't allowed for a while, but there's all sorts of things happen with those. Or they might not have even married and they've lived together. So there's all sorts of situations where families sort of contract and expand and then contract again.
Yeah. That was a big issue for me in discovering my family. I was watching this Swiss family, how they made it to America. And the answer was, yeah, the Swiss side wasn't the Swiss side. It was actually the grandmother who was German, whose mother was the first wife. Her father remarried the aunt. So her aunt was also, her stepmother, essentially, and the same case, except that there were 7 children in between, and then another 7 children, and the second 7 children all came to America. So they were already here. But they, who knew about what? Well, that's what letters are for. I don't know that we'll ever find any of those letters that talk about that kind of, this is only the 19th century, but still, I don't think there's any evidence of that, at least not that I know. But I discovered it after Roots Tech and discovering I had all these cousins because the family tree described them as cousins. I knew nothing about them. And sure enough, there they were. Just Fort Wayne, Indiana. Go figure.
Everyone has surprises in their family tree if they just look. Yeah,
that's right. And if you don't think you have surprises in your family tree, you haven't looked.
Hidden in plain sight is one way of describing it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of things hopping around here. I have been distracted and busy by things that I lit a match in starting this migration stories. And it turns out that it's really a story of stories, right? There are so many interweaving paths. I think this one will keep me going for a very long time as everyone else is stepping up. All I really have here at Projectkin is a stage. I'm just here to help other people get going. It's all about encouraging people to tell their stories. And I see so many of you jumping in here with suggestions. You've already joined as path pilots or already talked to me about some of the kinds of amazing stories that are coming in. And thank you for the hearts. These kinds of things are going to be very important in the coming months. We will be, I guess, making it a little bit more formal with launches. But as somebody so delicately put it to me in a reply email, I guess this is kind of still in development. Everything I do is a little bit in development, like Substack. Let's be honest here. But that's okay. And I think it not only is it okay, but it means that you have a chance to help define where it should go. In this particular oopsie, it was a matter, not to be too transparent on all of this, but I think it helps to understand what I'm doing. My first post talked about a migration paths, and don't you want to be a migration path pilot? Okay, fine. And then somebody said, but I want to submit stories. Oh, great. So I changed the original form to be a form for submitting stories. What was I thinking? I need to recreate another one for path pilots. So I just did that this morning. But the point is, there's really 2 different sides to this. Being a path pilot simply means I've described a path that I want to pursue, and you're welcome to come join me. And submitting stories, we're going to have stories for multiple people's paths because we have multiple family lines at different times going in different directions. We don't all, it's funny how we talk about that. Where do you come from? Of course, that's often a complicated question, right? But where do your people come from is a kind of expression we hear a lot. And yet it's a lot more complicated than any one place, right? How about that in Britain, where you have, from our perspective out here in the hinterlands, a relatively small space, and you may have multiple generations from the same space, but they intermarried, right? How do you answer that question?
You've got lots of different things. Where do people come from? And this is the thing about DNA. It's like how long have somebody lived in a particular area, and how long do they have to have lived there to actually qualify to be of that place? Are they the current generation? Are they the 2 generations back? Have they been there for 300 years? Everyone's different. Yeah. And I think it's quite funny because on Ancestry, when I looked at my results a while ago, it told me I had Welsh. And it's like, I know I don't have any Welsh, but they included the north of Somerset. And so the definition of geography and place and DNA and everything, they change. And county boundaries change, country boundaries change, country names change. So we live with constantly evolving records, I think, and we have to pick a path or two through these. What would you describe it? Rivers, I suppose. Yeah, you're stepping on stones in a river to find your way across, and there might be multiple different ways of getting there.
Yeah,
and which is
and
the
river is always changing.
Yeah,
yeah, the river is constantly changing. That's a great metaphor for it, because, and your point about how long do you have to have been in a place to have been from that place? That certainly resonates with me in my own history. I've lived longer in this one house than in any other place or country I ever lived in my life. It's kind of shocking to me. Well, I suppose it's probably true for many of us later in life, but in the sense that, I describe myself as being from Hawaii, then I learned to say largely because I traveled and I didn't really I lived there for 9 years. That's it. But it's, at a time of life. And it's a political question even, right? If somebody has immigrated, given up everything from their home country to be in a new country, and their children are born in this new country, are the children from the new country? They don't know anything else. Obviously, that quickly becomes a political question, and I don't want to go there, but it is just the same if you go back in history and say, well, my ancestors came from Denmark and went to Scotland, and then from Scotland they went to Kent. Are they from Denmark, or are they from Scotland? Are they from Kent? And I just made that up, but it's looking back in history, it's a really good question. And looking at the alphabet soup that is DNA, DNA doesn't come with stamps, does it, on time? How do you know?
No, this is one of the things about DNA. It's slightly fluid, and it changes quite a lot. But you talked about those, and I don't know whether you're using my ancestors as an example, because my grandfather, he was a tea planter. He was born in Scotland. He went to India where my mother was born, and he settled in Sussex, but he was only in Sussex for his retirement. So it's like he wouldn't have thought of himself as coming from here at all. He was Scottish. Right. But if you go back, one of the talks I did about his ancestors, I think I could trace back 8 generations in one particular place in Scotland. And then it goes back to what was Denmark at the time, but is now Germany. So it's like you come across these other things here. So you have to be really careful when you're defining things.
Great point. A great point, because I have absolutely no evidence to this whatsoever. I have a little bit of evidence of my mother's grandfather named Harger. And the story is told that the Harger family came from Denmark via Yorkshire. Okay, there are certainly burial plots in Yorkshire with a Harger name, no question about that. But Denmark, Denmark, Harger doesn't sound, I don't know, that could very well be German. That's a great point. Family Histories podcast, hello Andrew, says, I don't tend to think too much about the from question, because where do you draw the line? Where your family has been is far more interesting. Well, I'm glad you think that's interesting, because I've been in a lot of places.
Yeah. If you go back far enough, if you go back through British history, it's like, well, we were invaded by the Danes well before sort of 1,000 years ago. So it's like a lot of us have probably got Danish blood because of that. And so there's invaders and people moving from country to country. So there's all sorts of different things there. But you can't prove the majority of that. So we're just limited to the ones where we've got the records. So probably the last 300 years, if you're lucky, you might get a bit further back. As species were then. Yes.
That's right. And I think, to your point, Andrew, that it's where your family has been is far more interesting, because in a sense what you're saying is you have the thing that you've put together now that is the person here, but the where they came from implies a lot of the influences and the cultural learning and the variety that pushes us all forward, that gives us all that fuel for creativity. And I think that is where it gets especially interesting. And of course, in a modern world, which, come on, 150 years or so, that we've been able to even move with trains and then trains, automobiles and planes, and now packets to transform how we communicate and what influences us is, it is important. That's where language comes in.
It's really interesting that thinking about, well, what's it going to be like in 100 years' time? What records will people be able to get access to, and how will things have changed? And what can we do now to make it easier for people then in the future? That's one of the things we ought to be contemplating ourselves. It's like making sure that we've got our records in some sort of order, that we've done something where we put down the sources we've got as much as possible. So, and that people who come after us, even if they aren't particularly interested in the next generation, somebody in the future can pick things up.
Right. To build on what we started instead of throwing it all away and starting all over again. That's absolutely true. And it's also true of how to be a good ancestor. There's a project that Laurie Olson White here has been, Lost and Found Stories, has been working on to try to encourage people to think about how they're telling, when we're gone, each of us in our individual lives, we're leaving behind not only the records of the work that we've done in telling the stories of our ancestors, but also leaving behind a narrative of who we were. That little description. Emma Cox, who had journeys into genealogy. What did she do? Who was she? And it's it's something that we touch from time to time and makes us all a little bit uncomfortable to think about. But it's, at the end of the day, kind of what we're doing. And I think it's part of being comfortable in your own skin about where you are in life and what you're doing. And I think it's something that at a certain stage in life that many people get into this usually have come to terms with, right?
Yeah, and I think sort of we've all got piles of records, and we've got maybe half-finished pieces of research, and the intention maybe to write a book or to publish blog posts or something like that. And it's not a race to do it. It's a trying to do things when you have the time and when you have the inclination to do it. But just remembering that it would be nice to be able to actually leave something behind for other people.
Yeah, I am more of the putting in the order as I go, instead of anticipating some big moment when it will be some big crescendo of order. So while I have ambitions for writing books, it's explicitly not about my family history, my own family history. I see that more in terms of the incremental projects. And you say maybe even have an unfinished research. I have countless stacks of unfinished research. Okay, you laugh. That makes me feel better. And finding ways to, have strings to each of those, leave the cookie trail so other people can follow and build on it. To me, that's the most important thing, so that other people can build on the stories you're leaving behind. I think the ambition of writing the grand story is one that we all may come into at first, but it can be so overwhelming to most of us regular people.
I found doing my 8 great-grandparents and my 16 great-grandparents very helpful, because it made me research them and find out more about them, because I had vague ideas about some I knew quite a lot about, other ones I didn't really know anything. And I still don't know very much about some of them, but doing that and then trying to do little mini biographies of people and made me aware of, I don't know where my great-grandparents are buried. And it's like, one died in the local village where my grandparents buried, but I can't find her grave. And my dad didn't know, and he died fairly recently. And he was the last of that generation. So nobody else is around to ask. And it's just one of those mysteries that I may or may not solve at some point. But there's no record that I can find.
Yeah, that's a great example. And yes, for me, I'm very grateful to Robin Stewart and the whole campaign, Tad Callan and others who were say, hey, my 16s, who are your 16 great grandparents? And it really made me stop to. It was, I'm so allergic to prompts, I admit, but it was the sort of thing that was a discipline that I learned from all of you. And it was to put it down, just write it all down and then go, do you know enough to tell a narrative? And, boy, it was humbling. That I know I did not. And in fact, it was in the mistake that I found and publishing the mistake that I was able to spell out and find the correction. And that's also really humbling. But
we all make mistakes. We're human. That's what we do. But as long as we can try, if we find them, if someone else points them out, brilliant. Yeah.
I like to demonstrate it regularly just so all of you can see that it happens and you can recover, as we did today. But going through and I think I really believe in my heart that there is something so magically different about what we can do now in both making mistakes and ideally providing all of the documentation behind what we think we know and why we think we know it, so that we can essentially be collaborating with the future and building on what the past has given us. And that has been tremendously helpful. In my case, it was a cousin who reached out and said, well, wait a minute. These facts are all the same as what I have, but not that one. No, I don't think that's correct. And I think we are cousins. And here's why I think we're cousins, but that's not who we married. What? You're off by a generation. That was or something like that. I can't even remember exactly what the mistake is because, you try to forget these things. Yeah, it didn't happen.
But that's the thing, isn't it? There's always more to discover. And the more you put yourself out there, you share your stories, the more other people can, I know that name, or that rings a bell. That's an ancestor, or whatever it is, or I've heard of those people, or they were neighbors, or whatever it was. And you find other information.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I think it's a fundamental tension within genealogy in the sense of the pressure to be sure you are absolutely right and you have the proof, which is important. I like to equate it to arithmetic, to maths, as you say, that it should be right. But the truth is that as you go out there with all of the evidence that you know and you can document why you believe this to be true, that is actually one of the best ways to find out if you're wrong. So it's really important to carry along with that a spirit of it's okay to be wrong and how to be open to being wrong, even as you make every effort to be right and to not get all bent out of shape and defensive if you are wrong, because that's learning happening. And sometimes learning hurts a little bit. As anybody who's ever learned to ski remembers.
And just to also say something here, it's like we tend to believe things that we find. So we think we've got a marriage certificate, a birth certificate, a death certificate, whatever.
Yeah.
And we tend to believe that the information on there is correct. Quite often it's not. And it's that you only find that out at some point down the line where you find other information that either backs it up, contradicts it, or whatever it is. But the person who fills out a death certificate is not the person who died. So they don't know. They're guessing.
And as we know, people sometimes don't even know the facts themselves. No, your father isn't who you think it was. Yeah. One of my first experiences was a death certificate for a great grandfather that's referenced his brother as his father. Nope, that's not right. Or I was the informant on my mother's death certificate, and it took the county 3 tries to get it right. I mean, can you imagine? It's me. I'm right here. You just mailed it to me, and it says somebody else was the informant. What?
And you get where people deliberately hide things, don't you, on a birth certificate, where it's like they might change your father. Things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Or the wedding, of the marriage certificate, it's like
dates.
What did their father do? Well, they thought he did so and so, but he might have done something completely different.
Yeah. Well, as the TV show, I don't know if you have out there, but we had a TV show for many years called House, about a very cranky diagnostic doctor, and he would always start from
British.
Oh, that's right. Well, the actor certainly, yes. And he would come in with, everybody lies. Just start from the point of everybody lies, and it's actually, if you take away his cranky attitude and think about the people that you know and where they're coming from, it is true that they lie intentionally, but they also lie out of omission or out of, just didn't know, and want to put the best light on things.
I wouldn't say go with the thing about everybody lying personally. I would say be slightly skeptical and try and prove things and have more than one source to collaborate things. Don't believe it if you've got the same family tree.
Believe everything you
copied over 20 people and they all say the same thing. I'm talking about proper sources.
That's right. And, I like to think of everything as a treasure map. And I don't necessarily believe a treasure map. I don't necessarily believe X really does mark the right spot. But it can still be a useful trail and send you in a useful direction, just like a trail map also might not be accurate because, landslides change things. And everything is also constantly changing. Well, this is going to be a fun discussion on Thursday, next week, Thursday. As we peel back the layers, we had a fun discussion earlier this week in talking about food memories that was just yesterday, for Speaker's Corner. And our speaker, Lorinda Brendan, talked about taking on the Pillsbury Bake Off cookbook from 1959, which reflected 10 years worth of Bake Off best recipes. And every single recipe was listed in the woman's husband's name. They were all women who had submitted these recipes, and they were all in the names of their husbands, including Mr. Thomas Jones, Mr. Bill Williams, names that are, very difficult to find individuals and not very meaningful as individuals. And she's made an effort of finding these women, finding their stories. And what you're doing next week will take us back into looking at the women in your family tree and the ones who were making a difference in their time. Right?
And the next podcast episode for Journeys into Genealogy, I'm going to be talking to a lady called Janet Few, and we're going to be talking about putting your female ancestors into context. So that is one of the things that we do mention about names, the fact that a lot of people are just known by their husband's names. So how do you find them? Just different things like that.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to that as well. And the Journeys into Genealogy podcast is accessible. Go ahead and provide the best links.
Spotify, or Audible, Amazon, Apple, or it's most places.
All the usual sources, plus some added value that you drop into your Substack. Yes, Janet is indeed awesome. And of course, we are active supporters this year for the All About That Place as well. Janet is very active in the Society for One Place Studies, having some of the best known books on the subject, and looking forward to I'm just putting together the speaker list for our program in October for that program as well. So
just
with that,
the All About That Place is actually run by the Society of Genealogists, not the Society for One Place Studies. So the Society for One Place Studies are involved, but they're not the ones that are actually running it. And actually, I will be interviewing some of the speakers for that in late September. So that's another podcast episode coming up.
That'll be just after our program in September. Is there anything you wanted to add about that one?
I've got 3 people lined up. It's going to be a little bit about occupations and moving and why people moved. Another one's going to be about military history, and one's going to be about Scotland. So I've chosen 3 different ones, which hopefully will complement each other.
Excellent. So it's going to be a busy fall, starting up in fall here in the northern hemisphere, starting up in September and then going into October. And of course, to learn more about all about that place, you can go to the Projectkin calendar in October. There's a link that takes you back to the welcome page at the Society of Genealogists for their main page listing all of the speakers through the whole program. We're just a little tiny piece of it as the Pacific edition. So I was a little self-centered on my part. Sorry about that.
We're getting there. Lots to look forward to, aren't there?
Lots to look forward to, and keeping everybody focused and engaged. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Even as we jump in and out of time windows, we'll get the recording up for this one within a couple of hours. And I want to thank you so much for joining and for coming back. We missed you. We've missed you, Emma. It's great to have you back.
Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you all next Thursday.
You got it. Till then. Bye-bye now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.